Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullah. Welcome, dear brothers and sisters on ISB and ISBC social media. Uh, we're still talking about a very important topic, and we're trying to address this topic today from an Islamic perspective and institutional perspective, and try to put some light on the issue, and at the same time try to put some solutions. How can our community, move forward? Our community, like part of the problem or part of the solutions, all this stuff. We ask our beloved guest speaker today, Dr. Khalil Abdur-Rashid, which is the Muslim chaplain at the Harvard University and very well known in our community and very eloquent speaker, at the same time very knowledgeable scholar in our community. Thank you, Dr. Khalil, for joining us today. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Thank you, Amar. It's good to be here with everyone.
It's nice to see you, and thank you for all the efforts you're doing in the community. I've been watching you. Thank you for what you did in Ramadan. May Allah accept the Khalil, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, jazakallah khair, ameen.
So, Dr. Khalil, let me start by saying in Arabic, it's called tahrir al-mustalah. So, I need a definition for the word racism. What's racism means? And the reason for this question being asked, because like some people, they're advocates for not having racism, but they themselves might fall into the trap of having one sort or one flavor of racism. So what does racism means?
Well, racism is, simply put, it is discrimination or prejudice against a person or a group of people on the basis of being a part of a particular racial or ethnic group, typically a minority group. And that feeling of prejudiced or biased is oftentimes rooted in two different things. Is the idea that a person is lower than another person, or a group of people, a class of people is lower than another. So there involves a form of arrogance on the part of the person who feels that one group is higher than another on the basis of the color of their skin, or their habits, as it relates to the way they look. So this is the first thing: this feel of superiority on the part of the person who is racist. And the second component is the idea of mockery, and this is where prejudice comes in. That there are symbols and forms of representation and images that emerge in the mind of the person. Those images can be stereotypical. Oftentimes they're false. They're based on an idea or an image of what that race represents. And oftentimes there's a false notion behind that. And so it's a feeling, it's an attitude that manifests, that starts within the psyche of the person. Oftentimes it is taught, either actively taught or passively taught through cultural representations, through the person's exposure to other people. Those ideas, those become perceptions, and those perceptions become feelings, and then those feelings then become racialized, and they become, and there's an attitude that emerges. There's behavior. There are things that people do in the company of those other that person or that group, members of that group. There's actions that they do, and then there are inactions, things that they don't do as well. But it's all based in the core element of one person being elevated and another person being subjugated.
That's very nice definition, Khalil. But this triggers another question. I know that I didn't plan for this question, but this triggered another question, which is, can religious people or Muslim people have racism? And let me tell you why. For example, if I'm studying religion and I'm at a better state of knowledge than you, this is not the case. I'm just like putting this assumption, and then I have this superiority look that's because I know better, or I'm a scholar, then everyone should look to me at this level, or because I have more money, or because I live in this mansion and you live in this apartment. This kind of racism can I would say practicing Muslim fall into this sort or level of racism?
Good question. So we need to distinguish between arrogance on the one hand as a concept, racism on the other hand. And let me put all of um, racism would come under a concept, an Islamic concept that we all know and understand and read about called jahiliyyah. So racism is part of what the Quran would call jahiliyyah. Remember, the Quran talks about jahiliyyah in terms of not just the past, but it's the way some people think. It's attitudes and behaviors. So there's jahiliyyah in terms of jahil person. It's not just ignorance, but it's the idea that that there's prejudice behind the ignorance. And what you were talking about also relates to arrogance, which every kind of racism includes arrogance, but not every arrogance or not every form of arrogance is racism. So, for example, somebody may think that because of their wealth, they're better than somebody else, or because of their knowledge, they're better than somebody else, or because of their educational background, they're better than somebody else. That's a form of arrogance, but it's not racialized. The moment that I say, for example, I'm better than so and so because I'm black and so is white, that's when it's become arrogance that is rooted in race. And arrogance that is rooted in race becomes a special kind of arrogance. It's with arrogance related to income, for example, somebody who's wealthy being arrogant over somebody who's poor, that's a bad thing. But that is something that a poor person can change. A person can get rich. An arrogant person, the rich person can become poor as well, right? And they can make the wrong decisions. There's some human action related to arrogance as it relates to wealth, or arrogance as it relates to other things that we have some ability to control. When it comes to race, we don't have any ability to control that. So that's a specific category of arrogance. It's called racism, where I think I'm better than you because I'm black, or someone else thinks they're better than me because they're of a different race. And that's called jahiliyyah. That's not the only definition, it's a part of jahiliyyah. So racism is really bad. What differentiates racism from arrogance in that sense is the fact that it's a direct assault against the intentional diversity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put here, that is supposed to be for our benefit. In other words, we are different in the way we look and our backgrounds and cultures as people, because we're supposed to get to know one another and use the knowledge of the best of our diversity to uplift us. Racism is flipping that whole paradigm, where we use the knowledge of how we're different to animate the worst of us and to bring out the worst of us. So it's the opposite of what Allah Ta'ala wants, right? Lita'arafu, as the verse says. Racism inverts that and flips it. And instead of lita'arafu, it becomes litabaghadu, for example, right? To hate one another. And that's what makes it very, very dangerous, and a part of a jahili system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes lots of sense. Thank you for explaining this to me. And actually, you mentioned something that's very important, the jahiliyyah. And when you say the word jahiliyyah, what comes into our minds is going back to the old ages, where the desert people do not have this all this fancy tech and all this advancements. But do we live in jahiliyyah in 2020? Do we have jahiliyyah traces in 2020?
Oh yes, very good. Absolutely. Remember, jahiliyyah is not a historical condition. It is a human condition. This is a very important thing to emphasize. Many of our teachers and speakers and folks around the world taught about jahiliyyah as if it's something that happened in the past, as if it's historical. Jahiliyyah is not historical. It's a human phenomenon, and as long as there's human beings that exist, there will be jahili impulses. There'll be jahili conditions. There'll be jahili systems. And basically, simply, the classical example is, when Abu Dhar called Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, he called him a son of a black woman, and the Prophet was there, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, "Ya Abu Dhar, oh Abu Dhar, we're all sons of black women. You still have jahiliyyah in you." So Jahiliyyah is not, the Prophet wasn't saying you're conservative or you're going back in history. The Prophet was saying you still have this condition ideology. You're stuck to an old to a detrimental way of thinking that is destructive. And Jahiliyyah can be ideological. Jahiliyyah can be verbal. Jahiliyyah can be behavioral. Okay, so the way we think about things, the way we think about the world and our relationship to the world can be Jahili based. That doesn't mean that it's based in no knowledge. Right? To be Jahil in language means to be ignorant, but in reality, it means to be ignorant of one's connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the ayats that are there. So Jahili as an ideology or Jahiliyyah as a system of thinking means to adopt a system of thinking that is antithetical, that is outside of what the system that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put here and has taught us. So it's to adopt sort of your own way of doing things. And when you introduce your own way of doing things that is contrary and against Allah's way of doing things, or you introduce your own way of being and your own way of existing and your own laws and your own ways of structuring society and your own interpersonal reactions that's against the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has outlined things, then that becomes jahil. And so introducing the I, as in the capital I, ana, right? Introducing the idea that I know, that I will decide, that I am what's important, that I am better, that my way is what rules the highway. Ana khayru minhum, which is the paradigmatic statement of Shaitan, right? Khalaqtani min nar wa khalaqtahu min teen, when he was talking about Adam. That's the Shaitanic way, the ana, right? And that's what Jahiliyyah is. It's the rise of the ana, which is the rise of arrogance. And the reason Jahiliyyah is a problem for Muslims, the reason Jahiliyyah is a problem in the Quran, is because it's the madhab, if you will, of Shaitan. It is the ana. So whenever you see the rise of one nation, for example, that disparages another nation, that puts another nation down, calls them backwards and calls them third world and calls them uncivilized, that's the ana, that's jahili, but as it relates to a country. Whenever a person does that with somebody else based upon their skin color or whatever, that's the ana as well. That's jahili also. We just give it a different name. We call it racism. But in Islam, the concept of jahiliyyah encompasses that. And so as long as a person is able, or persons are able, or a country made up of persons, a city, a town, a nation, is able to say, ana, I'll do it my way, and they absolutely disregard Allah's way, and it's against Allah's way, right? The moment they introduce themselves as being better than, superior than, more entitled than, that's the way of the Jahiliyyah system. And that's what the Prophet ﷺ was dealing with the Quraysh and the tribes. And I would also put that's what all of the Anbiya were dealing with, not just the Prophet ﷺ. This is also lost in the discourse. All of the Anbiya in the Quran were dealing with Jahiliyyah in their times, right? So this is Fir'aun was Jahil, was a symbol of Jahiliyyah. The fall of Ibrahim alayhi salam was a symbol, of Jahiliyyah, for example. All of the Anbiya were dealing with this. The Ad and the Thamud, the Ashabul Aika, all of the different figures that the prophets were sent to, they were combating Jahiliyyah. Some of it was economical Jahiliyyah. Some was devotional, ubudiyya in terms of ibadah, Jahiliyyah, people worshiping idols, for example. Some of it was nafs Jahiliyyah and desires, in this case of Lut alayhi salam, right? He was dealing with people's desires and them acting falsely on their desires, right, in the wrong way. So these were, anytime the person thinks that they know better and God doesn't, and they want to do it their way, that's Jahiliyyah. And that's timeless. In other words, it's not restricted to a particular history. As long as you have human beings, you'll always have Jahiliyyah.
Very profound, and that's very evident. And I would say that this will lead us to the next thing, because like what you mentioned, that there is racism, there is jahiliyyah, they are intermingled together. And Allah says in His Holy Book in Quran, إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. So in order to us to be able to change stuff that we don't like around us, we have to change stuff that's inside us, either like individually or as a community. So my question to you, and I think that you have seen a lot about this racism and jahiliyyah, so that what our community can do to address this inside the racism inside our community itself.
That's a very good point. You know, there are two kinds of jahl in that the Islamic tradition recognizes. One is called jahl al-basit, which is simple ignorance, where the person just really doesn't know and is open to and understands that they don't know and wants to learn more to understand. And then the other kind, which is dangerous, which is called al-jahl al-murakkab, compound ignorance. This is when the person doesn't know, doesn't understand, but they think they know, based on prejudices, based on stereotypes, right? Jahl al-murakkab, right? They think they know. So what we have to do as a community is make sure each and every one of us, and then as a community at large, we need to make sure that we are doing what we can to exit, to leave Jahl Murakkab and go to Jahl Basit, and then go from Jahl Basit to some ilm, some ma'rifah, some knowledge about the situation. And in practical terms, what does that mean? Practically, that means that we need to engage in more conversations with diverse members of our community to understand each other better. The verse about lita'arafu is not like in the intellectual abstract sense to get to know each other, but Allah really wants us to get to know each other. In the same way that the Muhajirun and the Ansar in Medina really got to know each other. They were doing businesses together, they lived together, they worked together, they prayed together, they intermarried, they fought together, they died together, they thrived together, they lost together. We have to do more together. And that togetherness can't be artificial. And part of being together means that we hear each other's stories. We learn each other's narratives. One of the greatest things that has not happened yet in the American Muslim community is that, in my opinion and in my experience, the American Muslim community has not yet really understood the narrative of Black Americans in this country. And a significant portion of the American Muslim community are Black Americans who are Muslim. And that means the struggle of, we have two Americas in this country. We have the affluent America, which is predominantly white. But then we also have a working class America. And those two groups of folks that live in those Americas, they experience a different kind of America. The policing is different. The economic structures are different. The educational systems are different. The housing is different. The perspectives on freedom and liberty and justice and everything is different because the realities are different. So that means, as we have members in the Muslim community that have access to wealth, and we have members in the Muslim community that are working class as well. Therefore, we have members in the Muslim community that live two Americas, and they have two different realities. That's diversity is what Allah wants, but He doesn't want that kind of separation between us. We need ta'arafu. We need to get to know one another better. And one of the first ways to do that is to understand the history of people of color in this country. And not just history in terms of sound bites, right? And not just understanding a little bit about Dr. King, and just a little bit about Malcolm X and the sound bites related to them. Understanding really what the struggle was, really what happens in the history, and how those historical roots, what happened in the past, how it is still relevant today, in the same way that Jahiliyyah as a system is not just something in the history in the past, it's something that happens today. And so as a community, we need to have real informed conversations about this, but I would say conversations in different ways. People need to talk more with members of the Black American community, Muslim or not. People need to understand more about the history and the struggles of the Black American community, and then specifically the Black American Muslim community in this country. And that needs to be done through different mediums, through different venues. And the ta'arafu, getting to know has to come from that. So then when you understand the value of how a group of people survived all of this, you'll understand where their value is, and you won't look at the stereotypical images, those stereotypical meanings and photographs and images. You'll understand them as stereotypes, in the same way that the stereotypical image of the Arab terrorist or the stereotypical images of the Muslim terrorist, the same way you'll look at that and you'll find that disgusting. The exact same thing you'll do when you go through narratives and you understand people. It's the same thing we wanted Americans to do with Muslims in the post 9/11 era. We wanted Americans to get to know Muslims, because you can't get to know Islam separate from getting to know Muslims, right? We wanted Americans to see who we are. It's the same thing we have to do inside of our own tradition, inside of our own communities, that we have to get to know each other beyond the prayer. We don't get to know each other in Salat. Salat's not where we get to know each other. We have to dine more. We have to do business with each other more. We have to have conversations with each other more. We should, have, book discussions, film discussions, and about, and talk about the meanings of these things, and just listen, right? And understand this individual histories of people who lived through certain things, and the parents and what they've gone through, and how those struggles continue today. And then we'll understand very differently what the struggle is. Our kids will understand it very differently, and we will find that more commonality than difference. We'll find difference, but we'll find more commonality in the diversity that is there, and we'll be able to then view. We'll be able to view how we can love one another. You see, we can't love one another unless we know one another. You can't love something you don't know, and that's why we don't really have hubb and ukhuwa, true brotherhood and love in our communities, because we don't know each other. That's natural that you can't love someone you don't know. That's natural. And so we can't have real love unless we really come to know one another. When we come to know one another through difference, right, then we'll love one another better. When we love one another better, then we'll have communal unity. That's the key. We can't get to unity just by praying together. You can't get to unity just by fasting together. It doesn't work like that. That's ibadah. That's a requirement. Coming to know one another, getting to talk one another, spending more time with each other, going out as families, listening to stories. That's a nafila, right? That's not a duty. You don't have to do that. You're going above and beyond. You're reaching beyond yourself. You're going past the ana to the anta, and so that's the beauty of the human experience, that we don't have to be selfish. You can leave the madhab of shaitan, and you can come out and understand that someone else is more important than you are. And that's how we combat racism, by not giving in to the preconceived ideas that we've been taught. This is really important for American Muslims, because, like it or not, as American Muslims, the American part of us means that we are conditioned by living in this country. Like it or not, this country was born, raised, developed, formed, and fashioned through race. I would argue it's probably the only country in the world that is born, bred, and developed through the lens of race, and race only, through that lens, through the distinction between white and black, and white indicating wealth and power, and black indicating ownership and enslavement. That's this country, like it or not. That's the reality. And as an American living here, we're conditioned by the history of this country, and by institutions that are molded and fashioned through this country's evolution with that history. And cities, institutions in cities, religious structures, political structures, economic structures, community structures, the way that cities are planned, urban design, everything has been impacted by the history of race in this country. So as a person who's born in this country, or as someone who's migrated to this country and become a citizen of this country, we're formed and fashioned by race. And that means we are affected by images of race, positive or negative. And if we have access to wealth, then those images play out one way. And if we don't have access to wealth, those images are different, or that experience, is different. If you have access to wealth, the experience plays out one way. based on the images of race. And if you don't have access to wealth, the experience is very different. So as Muslims, we have to talk about that and learn that more and understand what we've been conditioned with, so that we can understand what we keep as part of our conditions as Americans, and we can understand what we need to get rid of. Where the jahiliyyah. That's why the Prophet told Abu Dhar, he identified it to him. He said, you still have jahiliyyah in you. That means as every Muslim, we have to ask ourselves, do I have jahiliyyah in me? That's not a question I can answer for myself. Somebody else outside of me has to answer that question for me. Somebody else has to give me their narrative, show me their experience, show me where I have gone wrong in their treatment, or where others have gone wrong in their treatment of me. Because my experience, you won't see it unless I tell you. So that has to come, and then you see from the narrative, aha, wow, I thought like that other person, or wow, I did the same thing with that person. So that must mean I was wrong. That must mean I have jahiliyyah in me. That's the way it happens. It's not punitive like you did this wrong. That's not what this is about. It's about listening to narrative and seeing from the example of another person that, this is wrong. That's why when they asked Isa alayhi salam, how did you become such a person of good khuluq, with good character? Isa alayhi salam, he said, I saw the mistakes of other people and I didn't do it. So when we see the mistakes of others, when we sit down with a brother or sister, hear their story, and we hear the mistakes of others, then we don't repeat those same mistakes because we see it as jahiliyyah. And if we condemn it in somebody else, we would condemn it in ourselves, right? That's the way this works.
Doctor, this is really impressive. I don't want to interrupt you. Actually, I have a long list of questions, but the way that you answer that gives like a strategy to develop. My mind keep thinking, لتعرفوا initiative, لتعرفوا club, لتعرفوا groups, so that we can know each other. It's like know each other, and then after knowing each other, move from just knowing into understanding, then developing some actions in a very positive way. So we need that. You mentioned something that's really might be a very good program to do, which is watching a film together. Yeah, we do that, but however, we lack the skills of a facilitator that comes after that. Say that, what did you learn about that? The impact of this. We need the skill set. I know that you do have the skill set. I know that you do this all over the United States. I wish this to be back, and I wish this actually would be used to bond and bridge the gap in knowledge, at least, so that we can move from just knowing, awareness, ta'arafu, into some actions that bond us together, into some transformational change initiatives that will change my mindset. Because as you mentioned, I might be a race, I have some traces of jahiliyyah and I don't know. My action shows that. So, but what's more important, that when I go into this journey or this transformation, I go without no prejudice. I go with a sense that I might be part of the problem. I need to be part of the solution. So that Dr. Khalil will point and say that, hey, Amr, you need to change that. You need to look into that. But we need skillful scholars with, I think was good facilitation skills.
Yes.
So before leaving you, I know that the time just came for 30 minutes. Before leaving you, I think I still have some good questions for you. I ask you, please, Dr. Khalil, I needed to be my guest in one of the next coming episodes. The reason for that, I need to develop some actions. This one considered an eye-opener, some strategies, holistic overall strategy, but we need to develop some actions. And we might see someone is watching us right now say that, hey, I will take that, I will go, and I need to use whatever space, resources, with that we can make this happen. But we need to move from strategizing into developing some key initiatives and actions so that we can transform and help our communities, help our cities, help our country, so that we can be part of the solution or part of the problem. This is very deep discussion. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Dr. Khalil, it's always a pleasure to listen to you. Wallahi, I have my long list of questions, but it's always a pleasure to listen to you. I know tons to give to this community, but your time is very limited. I wish at point we have a discussion, this was 3 years ago, about this movie reflection thing. I hope and wish this happen, because I don't know when the cinemas will be open or how can we do it in the ISBC. But this is something, keep it in mind and open it for everyone. Don't like for the small, open it for everyone, because this is the discussion that we need to hear and listen.
That's right.
Before leaving you, Mariam, may say that will this recording be available? Some of our guests, Mariam Ismail, saying that yes, inshallah, it will be available on the ISBC. Please, anyone who listened to that, listen, try to take notes, take actions, make your questions ready. I will be interviewing Dr. Khalil in the next episode, and hope that we get some action item to work on. Jazakallah khairan, Dr. May Allah bless you, and thank you for being with me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.